Some films are hits that set up an entire series of sequels, and some films, well, aren't. Whether it was an upstart that failed to launch or the ragged end of a series past its prime, these movies brought big plans to a permanent end. After 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man made $760 million at the worldwide box office, it was clear that Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker wasn't going anywhere. Naturally, a sequel was greenlit, along with sudden massive plans by Sony to use it as a springboard for a larger universe.
I told you I would be back!
Months before the debut of 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, screenwriters were hired to conjure up Sinister Six and Venom spin-offs, while further plans included a movie focusing on Black Cat and even a Spider-Man 2099 project. On the surface, the $717 million worldwide gross of the film should have been an automatic green light for any and all spin-offs and sequels, but in North America it barely cracked $200 million and was way more front-loaded than any prior Spider-Man installment. There was also the major problem that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a terrible movie that completely failed at juggling a slew of subplots. This mopey, overstuffed vision of Spidey just wasn't going anywhere near good enough to resonate with audiences, let alone leave them hankering for more adventures in this universe. Less than a year after it opened, Sony and Marvel Studios would enter into an agreement for a Spider-Man reboot. Save for Garfield's appearance in 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home, this killed the Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe dead in its tracks. The Dark Universe was an attempt to turn classic Universal monsters into an MCU-type saga that could spawn annual blockbusters at the box office. But then 2017's The Mummy happened. The film saw Tom Cruise's Nick Morton tangling with Sofia Boutella's title monster. It was a massive, globe-trotting action spectacle that was met with astoundingly bad reviews. Working neither as a horror film nor an adventure yarn, The Mummy appealed to nobody. It did okay in certain overseas markets, but given the lofty pre-release expectations for the project, not to mention its massive budget, The Mummy didn't come anywhere close to being profitable, and the idea of it spawning a cinematic universe was laughable. With that, subsequent Dark Universe movies like The Bride of Frankenstein were canned, but that's probably for the best. 10 years after Man of Steel kickstarted the DCEU, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom grounded it to a halt, and it was completely unintentional. As its release date drew closer, it became increasingly clear that with James Gunn and Peter Safran's takeover of DC Studios, live-action DC movies were about to get an overhaul, and there was no space for the characters and storylines in effect in Lost Kingdom. This was far from a glorious way to close out the entire franchise, even just in terms of delivering a fun, standalone feature. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom isn't an atrocious film, thanks to Patrick Wilson's committed performance as Orm and some zippy moments of Saturday morning cartoon fun, but it is largely phoned in, and much of the script calls for Jason Momoa's Aquaman to engage in buddy cop banter with his estranged brother, a style of dialogue that he's terrible at delivering.
Oh, excuse me, Your Highness, if I use comedy to mask my feelings and deal with stress. Those that end up looking like you, a very tight butthole.
Throw in unengaging fight scenes and the baffling way in which returning villain Black Manta is handled, and it's no wonder the movie was such a forgettable swan song for the DCEU. After an 8-year absence, the G.I. Joe movies finally returned to theaters in July 2021 with Snake Eyes: G.I. Joe Origins. This solo origin story for the no longer silent assassin Snake Eyes starred Henry Golding and was intended to launch a whole slew of follow-ups. That never happened, of course. Upon its debut, Snake Eyes was dismissed by moviegoers around the globe. It was a classic case of all setup and not enough standalone entertainment. The movie was obsessed with laying out every detail of how Snake Eyes and his rival Storm Shadow got their names and personalities, yet didn't give any thought to conjuring up immediate summer blockbuster fun. Snake Eyes didn't even put his famous costume on until the film's final scene. With that, all dreams were dashed of Snake Eyes starting a saga encompassing further G.I. Joe movies and crossovers with other Hasbro intellectual properties. Knowing is half the battle, and alas, Snake Eyes had no knowledge of how to properly launch a cinematic universe. Sony's Spider-Man universe seemed doomed from the start. How can an entire franchise be built around a character that doesn't appear in any of the films? And beyond the undeniably lucrative Venom movies, what do you have? Both 2022's Morbius and 2024's Madame Web bombed, but at least they gave us some good memes.
I have always really loved Marvel movies.
Closing out 2024 was Kraven the Hunter, an Aaron Taylor Johnson movie that offered a feature-length origin story for its titular supervillain. Much like Snake Eyes, Kraven spends the entire runtime building up to putting on his classic outfit, maybe a sign that your movie has just wasted everybody's time. But even weeks before the film hit theaters, Sony's Spider-Man universe was already basically dead in the water. The dismal audience reception for Kraven the Hunter didn't suddenly give the SSU a new lease on life. The film was the equivalent of one giant shrug, the ultimate insult to this endlessly delayed and overly expensive venture. There just wasn't much to get invested in when it came to a movie this visually drab and devoid of personality. Then on its opening day, news broke that Sony's Spider-Man universe was officially defunct. With that, an utterly bizarre era in comic book movie history came to a whimpering close. Believe it or not, 2017's King Arthur, Legend of the Sword was initially envisioned as the start of a 6-film saga that would span all corners of Arthurian legend. If all went according to plan, the film's ending tease of Arthur creating the Round Table would lead to a succession of sequels and spin-offs. Unsurprisingly, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword was a critically reviled waste of time that came nowhere close to accomplishing its ambitions. Audiences and critics alike were put off by the film's excessive CGI and drab color scheme, restricting key pieces of Arthurian lore like Merlin to background appearances, or sequel hints removed any of the fun elements people would want out of a King Arthur movie. And Charlie Hunnam's dreadful lead performance just hammered home how ill-conceived the whole enterprise was. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword never inspired further adventures in its mythology. It was a one-and-done misfire whose only legacy was as a cautionary tale. This Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans-style vehicle wasn't just supposed to spawn traditional sequels, but multiple spin-off films. But in the years since its debut, none of those movies have emerged. Much of that came down to how the Gray Man failed to impress anyone who watched it. This glossy spy movie had no personality or inventive action chops to speak of that might make it resonate with viewers. Plus, Gosling's subsequent Kenergy in 2023's Barbie far overshadowed this 2022 dud, where he just pouts and drops groan-worthy quips.
You hurt?
I mean, my ego's a little bruised.
By late 2023, former Netflix film head Scott Stuber admitted that it was unclear if The Gray Man 2 would ever happen. Years later, this bizarre vision of espionage entertainment remains in limbo. The New Mutants was greenlit with ambitions of ushering in a new era of X-Men features. With R-rated projects like Logan and Deadpool, it only made sense for these mutant movies to start exploring territory like horror cinema or teen-oriented stories. The New Mutants could have upended audience expectations for what Fox Marvel films could look like while providing a new moneymaker for the studio. None of that ever happened, of course. Even before that fateful Disney-Fox merger, the New Mutants experienced numerous delays due to issues like plans for extensive reshoots, which didn't take place, or COVID-related theater closures. Meanwhile, Disney taking back the X-Men after its Fox purchase suddenly meant that the New Mutants wouldn't be the start of a new chapter for these films. It closed out the Fox era of X-Men movies instead. The poor reception upon its release in August 2020 ensured that nobody was weeping for this being the finale of the X-Men saga. Valiant Comics long harbored ambitions of breaking onto the big screen, and 2020's Bloodshot was meant to be the launchpad for a larger Valiant Comics cinematic universe. The film focused on Vin Diesel as a soldier who's resurrected as a superhero, using nanotechnology to fight evil and uncover the truth about his past.
I told you I'd find you.
The box office prospects of Bloodshot were capsized by the pandemic, which shut down theaters just 1 week into its theatrical run. But even without the health crisis closing off its financial potential, the movie likely wouldn't have taken off culturally, failing to gain momentum from either critics or viewers. The PG-13 actioner was deeply generic affair, devoid of the big creative swings marking beloved superhero movies like The Dark Knight or Guardians of the Galaxy. Bloodshot flamed out as a failure on all fronts, and unsurprisingly, the Valiant Comics film franchise never came to pass. Harbinger and other adaptations of Valiant's properties have languished in development and are unlikely to ever get made. Rather than being Valiant's answer to Iron Man, Bloodshot was its equivalent to 2017's The Mummy, killing a potential cinematic universe in one fell swoop. Stephen King's Dark Tower book series is an expansive saga spanning thousands of pages, multiple installments, and extensive lore. While the popularity of the books has made them ripe for adaptation, it's always been tough distilling the Dark Tower into one feature film. That doesn't mean it hasn't been tried though. Long trapped in development hell, the initial concept was for the Dark Tower to be spread out over several films and multiple seasons of a TV show. And before this final movie version hit theaters, plans were announced for a TV series continuation of its world. But those ambitions quickly ground to a halt. Everything that could go wrong with the Dark Tower did, and the film was bombarded with negative reviews, skewering its cheap aesthetic, an involving narrative, and the bizarre decision to set so much of the story on boring old Earth instead of the fantastical midworld. Between that and a middling box office run, all the urgency to blow up the Dark Tower into a cinematic universe vanished. These worlds would subsequently remain within the pages of King's treasured novels.